Hey, folks, greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at Secure IT 360, coming at you with a new episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. You've got Mr. Darrius and myself, Brad. We're going to be talking about future trends in penetration testing. I think it's an appropriate topic. We're wrapping up 2023, going into 2024, and there have been a pile of changes in our landscape. And so we're going to kind of start diving into that. There's very likely going to be a second part to this because it is a lot of material to cover. And we feel like it would be better suited probably instead of making like a 45-minute episode, maybe we make 220s. So we'll see how it goes. Before we get into all that though, quick admin. If you guys like what we do and you enjoy the episode, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff on whatever channel that you're consuming this through. The most important thing you can do is tell your friends about us and help spread the word. All right. So Darrius, just kind of like off the top, man, like obviously it makes sense that we need to be looking forward. Why is it so critical, especially in the pen testing world?
Oh man. So it's kind of interesting. Yes, particularly in the pen testing world, we do have to keep up with things, but I think it goes for just the nature of just IT, cybersecurity in general, is that things move fast, things move quickly. And if you really want to stay relevant in the industry, you have to keep pace with what's going on, which involves having to adapt to new technologies, new processes, just all of that. Because the reality of the matter is the threat actors, they're adapting. And so, as they adapt, so do we.
Man, I would even, I would take that a step further and say the threat actors are setting the pace. And so we are even in the pen testing world, there are times when we're proactive. There are examples where our team is putting out CVEs or our team is putting out POCs for exploits and stuff. And so in that regard, in some cases we are proactive, but I would say 90% of the time, the threat actors find something before we do, and then we adopt that into our program. And so, it's interesting. At least to me, it's a little paradoxical, if you will, that we're still seeing the basics. So like we still see cross-site scripting like almost every week, right? Which cross-site scripting, I think, originated in the 90s, man. So we're like 20, 30 years out, still seeing that stuff. But yet we're still adding new different types of exploits and different platforms. And, now there's, impersonation in the cloud, and there's, all this like really cool new stuff. So the old stuff doesn't really go away. So we still have to track it, keep up with it. But it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And we have to be, kind of aware of all of that. So, it's fascinating, at least, just kind of from a high level, I think,
and it's one of those things. It's one of those things that's kind of interesting. Just piggybacking off of that this is kind of like one of the only jobs where you work on something really hard and it's really cool. And it's like, look at this amazing thing I did. And then a couple months down the line, it's like, doesn't matter. We've moved past it.
Yep. Yeah. It's almost out of date as you write it.
Yep.
And I don't know, man, it's really cool, but it does keep you on your toes. No question about it. And it's also, interestingly enough, the only job I know of where you can beat up on somebody's project and they'll thank you for it afterwards.
Yeah, 100%.
I don't know. It just seems weird, man. Everything about this job is weird. So we talked a little bit about how the threat landscape changes. We have to pace that. We have to keep up with it. So, the looking kind of at the show notes, like evolving threats, right? So what are some examples of things we kind of expect to see going into 2024 based on what we learned in 2023?
Yeah. So this is one that I feel like you, Spencer, our entire team, we've talked about it before. And that's the fact that you can expect to see exploits written in new languages.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why is because security tools are catching up. It used to be, hey, PowerShell was baked in and you could do so much with PowerShell. But now a lot of EDR solutions, they're catching on to it. They're able to catch the signs. And so now it's becoming harder to even use PowerShell to do things.
It is.
So
yes.
What do? You pivot. And so that's where we get into languages like Rust and Nim and Go, which I think, I'm a huge fan of Go. But I think we can expect to see more exploits written in these languages just because one, EDR solutions, they're not fully catching them yet. But
Right.
two, they can provide some very similar functionality in being able to use like calling native Windows calls, window API calls. It's a thing where you don't have to reinvent, you don't even have to reinvent the wheel. You're
Yeah.
literally just porting your export to a new language, and then boom, now you're no longer getting blocked. You're able to disable logging. You're able to basically do whatever it is you need to do.
Yep, completely agree with that. And again, you can almost look to history to be able to see what's coming in the future. And 10 years ago, we didn't worry about that stuff, right? We could do everything either in native scripting languages like Bash or the terminal or whatever, or we did it in Python or Perl. All that's changed. It's completely different. And now you have to have right. And it's still around, man. Like you can still get new POCs off of GitHub in Perl. And I'm just like, who's writing this stuff, man? But anyway, so yeah, I mean, no, I completely agree. And it does make for some challenges for us, right? Because now we got to keep track of that stuff. Same thing for you in the web app pen testing world is, again, 10 years ago, everything was written in C# or PHP, and it was almost all robust front end applications with integrated logic. Now everything's freaking Node with an API behind it.
Yep.
And we just have to continue to learn and be familiar, and the old stuff doesn't go away. So I expect that to continue going into 2024. I think we're going to continue to see these compartmentalized applications, these framework-based applications are going to continue because they're easy. Yep. I mean, you can build those faster than you used to be able to build a wireframe. And of course, APIs make everything amazing. Half of the API construction is automatic now. So yeah, I think that's going to continue. And I do think we're going to see new and creative programming languages in the endpoint space. I think we're going to see that too. So, all right. So new TTPs, what did we see? And this is recent, right? So talking about some of these threat actors are doing the Robinhood thing, which is kind of new. It's not completely new, but it's kind of new. And what I mean by that is there was recently a threat actor that hacked into an organization. The organization didn't report it. The threat actor reported them to the SEC.
Man.
Like, wow.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
And we've seen in the past where threat actors would release information like publicly saying, hey, yeah, we hacked into these guys and here's our proof. We've never seen them ally themselves with the regulatory space. And I think they have set a new kind of pace, right? With this particular threat actor. I think other threat actors will pick up on that. And I think we can expect to see that as part of the ransom. So it's not just going to be, hey, if you don't pay me, it's going to be like, hey, if you don't pay me and you don't disclose it, we're going to report you.
Man. Yeah. And that definitely sets a new precedent, 100%.
Yeah.
Because, man, previously, yeah, I wonder, as you mentioned it just makes me think of one, how does that affect cyber insurance?
It's a great question.
Yeah, that, and just also the fact that, yeah, a lot of times in the past, it's like, hey, we had a breach. It's really easy to kind of just pay the ransom, sweep it under the rug.
Yep.
So, I can definitely see how that's definitely going to change the landscape.
Yeah, for sure, man. And like you said, there's going to be ripples across the entire industry. In DFIR, you're going to see ripples in insurance, regulatory space, all that stuff. There's probably going to be different penalties or maybe even some more legislation written around that. It's just going to make everything even more complicated than it already is. So what about some other evolving threats? So one of the things I see in here, I know you want to talk about a little bit, the MFA prompt bombing.
Yeah. So this is one to where we're getting to the point now, and I think we see this a lot on our external network pen test is, reality matter is everything has MFA now.
Yeah.
The chances of you really finding an admin panel or a solution that doesn't have MFA, pretty much non-existent.
It's rare. Yeah. I mean, even in the external pen test space, it's uncommon for us to pop a set of credentials and it not be MFA'd.
Yep, 100%.
It's rare.
And so with that, that's where MFA prompt bombing came up, right? You got to this point where it's like, okay, well, I have valid creds. Well, let me do something like one. I'm gonna get a VPN and try to come in from where I think this user normally logs in from, right? So we have
Yeah.
something like that, and then I'm just going to continuously hit, you know, hit log in until eventually you accept yes. Well, I think kind of the interesting thing about that is, while I think that is an evolving threat, we're seeing security vendors respond to that. To where, like for example, Microsoft now used to have the ability to just approve, deny.
Yep.
That's now been deprecated. Now it's 100%. Like maybe you don't have to go grab a code, but it's at least saying, hey, at a number pops up, enter it into authenticator on your phone.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of changes things a little bit, to where now we as pen testers and threat actors, we do have to be a little bit more strategic with our MFA prompt bombing. Something
Yeah.
else that Microsoft recently announced that they were going to do is they're trying to reduce MFA notifications. And so they're, from my understanding, they're tying in the suspicious login feature with MFA. So it's definitely a situation of, hey, I think this is a suspicious login. I'm not
Yeah.
even going to notify the user. And
Yep.
so I definitely expect at some point to eventually we will figure out a way around that. But for the time being, that adds an additional layer of complexity.
I agree. And I would almost say that this is the reverse of evolving. And what I mean by that is it's actually evolving better, because the prompt bombing is a relatively recent attack method. However, to your point, the vendors have done a great job of pivoting quickly. And so they pivoted so quickly, in fact, that there was only really a short window of time that you could effectively prompt bomb. And while there are still clients out there using older solutions that do allow prompt only, I'm looking at you,
Duo.
Duo. Yeah. Duo's, it's been tough, man. Cause the first thing we do when we ask a client, during kickoff, it's like, all right, what kind of MFA solution are you guys using? And they're like, oh, we're using Duo. And we're like, you don't have push on, do you? And they're like, yeah. We're like, man, it's going to be a tough one for you, buddy. And so, and I mean, 80, 90% of the time, it used to be 100% of the time. We've had one client this year that we prompt bombed and they didn't click, but every other one has. And so, it's almost a given at this point that if they're using prompt only for MFA, we're going to end up inside their environment. So, we're glad to see, but yeah, to your point. And by the way, even Duo, just to be clear, has the option to do a code, but not everybody's using that yet, but it's just less and less. And so
I will say that's why I'm impressed by Microsoft's approach of, they're just outright, they're like, hey, you have no option anymore.
You have no option. I love it.
Yeah.
Which is odd, by the way. Again, Microsoft, man, half of their security vulnerabilities are air quotes features that they won't turn off, like user enumeration through OneDrive. But then they turn around and they do amazing, leaps forward in fixing big problems like MFA prompt bombing. And so they make no sense to me. All right. So I agree. I think that's something that we need to watch going into 2024. I think MFA prompt bombing is going to slowly go away, just like some of the other problems have slowly gone away in the authentication space. And I'll tell you something else that we can lump in with that too is SSO. And I would even take that a step further and say almost zero trust. And what I mean by that is everybody's putting conditional access out front. Everybody's putting SSO out front. We're doing a pen test this week on a client that we've pen tested like every year for 5 years. And every year their application portfolio gets beat up really bad because they're all custom apps. It's a really specialized space that they live in. And so the difference this year is they SSO'd everything to Microsoft. And it's all conditional access. It's all MFA. And so this pen test was us beating our head against the wall, trying to, password spray, credential stuff, get access to an account, which we didn't do. And so their pen test report's going to be really short by comparison to previous years because they've SSO'd everything and they've put it kind of behind that trust wall. And so we're seeing a lot more of that, by the way. And I mean a lot more by orders of magnitude from January to December. It has changed. The landscape has changed. And I think that's going to continue. I do think we're heading toward a zero trust being the standard, or at least everything being behind a wall of auth. So like you can't even talk to this app unless you present me with a valid key. So I think that's a good thing. I like to see it. It does make pen testing really hard, which is a good thing. So yeah.
But it also means that we just adopt, right? So, I mean,
Yep.
in terms of the MFA prompt bombing, it maybe that goes away, but then now maybe the focus then comes, all right, can I steal your token?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
it definitely, with every it's an arms race, right? And
It
so
is an
every
arms race,
time one method goes away, another one eventually pops up.
without a doubt. It's part of what makes the job fun. So yeah, token theft's a really big thing right now. There are a lot of evolving tools. I would tell people to watch for token phishing, token theft, watering hole attacks, things like that. I still think we're going to see a lot of that evolving to take the place of MFA prompt bombing. Um, and so I would say keep your thumb on that one because it's gonna blossom in 2024. In the third party supply chain compromise is kind of the last thing on the list for us. Yeah, it's going to continue, dude.
Yeah,
Why would I go attack? Let's use power companies as an example. Why would I attack a power company when I can go and I can attack Siemens or however you pronounce that name, right? Because we know they produce PLCs for basically everybody in the freaking country, and it's probably a lot of people outside the country. So why don't I just go embed firmware viruses into their PLCs? Because I could probably hack them easier. They're much larger. They're manufacturing, which is harder to secure, and then just let it bake out into these power companies. So yeah, I do think supply chain is going to continue to be a big thing going forward.
yeah, it's not going anywhere at
No,
all.
it's not. It's not. Um, so, all right. So there's one thing left, and it's cloud. Do you want to save that for part two, or do you want to dive right into it?
No, let's dive into it because I
All right,
think
cool.
we've touched on it a little bit already, but I think it's
Yeah.
such a big deal, and not only just from a threat actor perspective, but also I just keep going back from a security control perspective, and you touched
Mhm.
on it earlier. Um, these vendors are getting better, and what we're seeing, especially within the web app space, we're seeing less and less of, oh, I wrote my own custom app and it's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
living, on these servers that we control. And it's more so, nope, I wrote a front end and they just consume cloud services. And
Yep.
that dramatically changes things. I mean, I look at, one of my favorite things to do is upload a reverse shell. Ooh, look, now I'm on the server.
Yeah.
Can't
And by the way, you
really.
just pivoted from dev to prod.
Yeah, right, yeah. But you know what? Can't really do that if, every time I upload a file, it's going to an S3 bucket. Not that you can't,
Yeah.
but it just adds an additional layer of complexity. It's not as
Sure, it
simple as
does.
it used to be. Um, and so
Microservices, man.
yeah, we're seeing more and more of that, which is great. It just means we pivot more towards okay, now my focus, if you're using Kubernetes, now my focus is, can I get onto your Kubernetes cluster, and then can I pivot from there. It just
Yeah.
changes things.
It does. And so I would argue, so it's, like you said, it's a good and a bad thing for people, right? It's good because it solves some problems. The old style, 3-tier web application architecture sitting on physical boxes and a DMZ, yeah, it's time for that to go away. We have better solutions for that. And because that's going away, like you said, it's a little bit harder to attack those physical pieces of infrastructure. I can't run XP command shell, right? Because it's a no SQL database with an API. Like, it just doesn't happen. So that's cool. But the problem, to your point, is we're also feathering out that attack surface now. So instead of having 3 pieces of architecture, I got 25. And there are microservices, there's APIs, there's the front end. Now we're farming off authentication. Identity management is like an 18th piece of the puzzle. And so that what that does for me is that's a lot more opportunities for somebody to make a mistake. Right. And to your point, maybe I attack Kubernetes, right? Maybe instead I attack your core cloud infrastructure, right? And I go after your Azure AD instance, because once I get in there, now I can start impersonating people. Now I can start, spinning up my own malicious applications and stuff like that. So while you do get the things like you're talking about, where certain attacks go away and this centralized view of, if I attack the front end, I can get to everything else, that is going to get more complicated. But I mean, I'm just going to directly attack the individual components now.
Yep.
So yeah, it forces us to change, and this is something that Tyler actually hit on an external penetration test. He found an exposed cloud resource that was not supposed to be publicly available. And the conversation we had with the client is like, hey, this is what scares us about this stuff. And I think it was an S3 bucket. but it's one ACL misconfiguration away. It's one checkbox from being dumped on the internet, right? And how many times have you heard of legitimate, data exposure events happening because of that?
Yeah,
It still happens,
it happened
right?
with Microsoft a couple of months ago. If I'm
Yeah,
not mistaken. Yeah, with some
it
AI
did.
stuff. So
And so, and that's something that, goes back to, my kind of earlier days in the industry, which is, nothing you have should be one misconfiguration away from a catastrophe. There need to be layered controls, layered approach. And we seem to have lost that a little bit, in my opinion, during our rush to the cloud. And so, I think that's something to watch. I think we need to start seeing some better controls around that.
and I do think the vendors are doing, like I said, I just keep harping on this, but it's just because I see it. They're doing a little bit of a better job of, it used to be in the past, AWS, Azure, by default, it was like,
it was all screwed up. Yeah.
You had to know how to configure it securely. But now they're moving towards this model of, okay, you're going to spin this thing up. You now have to go out of your way to turn off some of the security controls.
Yeah, and it barks at you the whole time. It's like, if you do this, it's going to be insecure. Are you sure you want to? I love that. I think that's fantastic. I wish it were that way everywhere. Unfortunately, the more complex your environment gets, the harder it is to let those those controls help you. But you just got to know what you're doing, man. And it's hard to know what you're doing when the entire interface to your cloud management architecture changes daily. I'm talking to you, Microsoft, and Amazon for that matter. Every time I log in, it looks completely different. And the tool that used to be 3 clicks in the right, it's in a completely different place now. So they need to settle that shit down, in my opinion.
You tell me you don't like having to, you don't like the fact that Microsoft renames their tools?
Oh man, they rename it, they move it, they change what it does. And it's just like, dude, can we just not? And in my mind, I just envision, like, every time a new manager gets to Microsoft for a product, he's like, no, this is going to be me establishing my place in Microsoft. So I'm going to rename it to some arbitrary thing that nobody's ever going to remember 5 years from now. It drives me nuts, man. But yeah, so guys, keep looking into 2024 for the evolution of cloud, the evolution of threats to cloud. Cloud's not going away, obviously. In fact, it's probably going to become the most prolific infrastructure anywhere. If it's not already, it may already be there.
And the last thing I just kind of want to cover is also expect to see threat actors utilizing the cloud more and more and more and more. It's going to happen. Not just attacking it in terms of being able to go from cloud to on-prem and vice versa, but also
we leverage it.
Yeah, 100%. Like, if I'm going to spin up, some phishing infrastructure, it's going to look extremely realistic when it's coming from AWS or Azure. Or in a lot of cases, you'll once again, going back to misconfigurations, you may be blocking everything external, but if I spin something up in AWS, you're in AWS, and you don't have everything configured correctly, well, boom, now I can talk directly to whatever it is I want to because of how you have things configured. So you can definitely expect to see threat actors and pen testers utilizing these services a little bit more.
Yeah. We actually use AWS to attack Microsoft all the time. So, and like almost daily. So yeah, absolutely, man. No question about it. It's happening now. It's going to continue to happen. So, and actually we use DigitalOcean to attack both. No, all three. We attack Google, Microsoft, and from DigitalOcean. So, sorry about your reputation, DigitalOcean. That's probably our fault. But anyway, listen, folks, that's all the time we have for today. You can expect part 2 very soon. If you have any questions for us, reach out. We'll put all our contact information in the show notes, and thank you for listening and watching. If you enjoyed this, like I said before, share, subscribe, whatever the little buttons and all that good stuff do. And we'll see you guys next week.